My time is up, so I'll yield back.
And I now recognize Mr. Weber for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. Very interesting. Mr. Mills, in your prepared testimony, well, you said a couple things about patents, for example, and I like that because not all patents yield results. I'm reminded Thomas Davenport had a patent on the electric motor in 1837 that went absolutely nowhere, and so while it was transformative, it wasn't practical. You also say that transforming the energy economy is not like putting a dozen people on the moon a handful of times. It's like putting all of humanity on the moon permanently. And quite frankly, I've got some friends that I wouldn't mind doing that with. Let me just say that and get that out of the way. But to do the latter would require science and engineering that doesn't exist today, is what you said in your statement. And we're talking about raising the funding to $3 billion, which would necessitate that we cut from somewhere else. We have to find that money. So I don't know that it is practical. Could you expand on this comment and detail the science and engineering capabilities that would be required for success in a non-carbon energy economy moonshot today? I'd like to hear you elaborate on that.
Well, first, if I might, because it's part of the elaboration, I'm in agreement with probably 99% of what's said in this hearing with other witnesses. It's one of these areas that's a challenge because the debates that are important are in the 1% disagreements, it's where the transformations happen. And my concern is in the implementation, and then as it relates to the vision, to your point, that it won't be a single magical thing. I mean, the magical thing we need to change the world's energy economy would be the equivalent of the discovery of fission, or to use a material science example, if one were able to engineer a metamaterial that was strong enough and function, and it was lightweight, that was a shield against X-rays and gamma rays, you could make what engineers thought you could do in 1950, a nuclear-powered car. I mean, you'd make a little pellet-sized reactor, and this would be magical. It's not crazy to think of those things, and it's certainly not possible with anything we know today. That kind of transformation would certainly be the equivalent of the discovery of petroleum or the photovoltaic effect. Some things can't be done. My point really was that you can't make a photovoltaic cell more efficient than the photons that arrive at Earth, and converting them you can't convert 100% efficiency. So we know what the boundaries are. So when one looks at a proposal, one can know, without knowing anything about its merits first, whether it can be transformational. If you change the cost of something by 20% or 30%, in business that's meaningful. It's not necessarily transformational to the world because you're chasing other things that are changing by 20 or 30%. The market that solar, and wind, and biofuels and batteries compete against is the hydrocarbon market. It gets better all the time too, to the benefit of everybody on the planet. So I think your point of patents is a particularly important one. Patents are a metric, and they're important. I have a few patents from my early career. They were fairly foundational ideas. One wasn't. Some are pretty sloppy patents. The patent office can be overwhelmed, as we all know if we've been applicants. But they're an important measure. They're useful. But they don't necessarily measure a foundational change unless you look at what we, as you know, not to get in the weeds, prior art. If there's no prior art, it might be foundational. That'd be one mechanism, for example, to sort of fine-tune the ARPA-E mission, is if we get a patent, is it a derivative, an incremental patent, or is it actually foundational, no prior art?
Well, thank you for that. I do need to move on to a second question for all the witnesses, running a little bit out of time here. We've heard a lot today about the need to significantly increase ARPA-E's budget as quickly as possible. But in Congress, as I mentioned, we're going to have to find that money somewhere. We're called to be good stewards. And I'm not sure that any of our my constituents would be on board with an increase of close to $700 million. That's hard to justify back home in spending at the Department of Energy. So providing this kind of funding increase for ARPA-E is almost, as I said earlier, going to require cutting somewhere. So let me put you all in the driver's seat for a minute. Where would you cut, Dr. Majumdar? I'll start with you.
Well, that's a really difficult question to answer, Mr. Congressman.
Tell me about it.
I think this is a discussion between you and Secretary Perry and the current team out there, the undersecretaries and others.
So you've not and I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm really short on time. You've not thought through this, don't have an exact example. Dr. Williams, I gave you the same question.
Well, of course, one thing that can be done and is being done increasingly at the states level is more leveraging. And there are a variety of interesting new financial mechanisms for increasing leveraging and the output benefits of what we get from ARPA-E and from other programs in government. So I would strongly encourage that as one mechanism for getting more bang for bucks out of the federal funds that we do supply.
Dr. Wall?
Yeah, I think I'd go down the same path. First of all, I'm not sure that I would close the budget debate just within energy, considering the importance of energy for our future, but to look at the entire budget, which gives you a little more flexibility. But I think as we look at growing the ARPA-E budget, we ought to be also looking at other things that they could be doing, other models that could be added. Dr. Majumdar raised a parallel to Sematech, which brings in more industrial partners who can participate in a way that's a little bit different than the model that we have now. So I'd also look at changing the operating model with this incremental funding at the same time.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I got to go on. Dr. Griffith, finally, I'll have to be brief, please.
To tie it to your moonshot question of the previous, what does a moonshot look like? If America plays its card right and completely electrifies its economy, it'll only need half of the primary energy it needs today to supply the economy as it is. If it does that, it will be the leader of the world economy, and it will more than pay for itself. Okay. If you had to just very callously look, I would look at other poorly spent budgets within the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense, their research budgets.
Okay, let me stop there because I'm way over my time, and I appreciate y'all's indulgence. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now